Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Module 14 of our Research Methods course. Today, we're tackling one of the most critical challenges in research, the gap between what we discover in our studies and what actually happens in practice. This lesson, Research to Practice, Bridging the Gap, represents a crucial turning point in your research journey. We're moving from understanding how to conduct research to understanding how to make that research matter in the real world. Let's begin with our learning objectives for today's session. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to first identify the factors that contribute to research practice gaps, understanding why excellent research often fails to reach those who need it most. Second, analyze models for translating research to practical application, exploring proven frameworks that help move knowledge from journals to real-world settings. Third, evaluate strategies for enhancing research utilization in your professional contexts, determining what works best for your field. And finally, develop stakeholder engagement approaches throughout the research process, because research done with practitioners is far more likely to be used by practitioners. These objectives build on everything you've learned in previous modules and prepare you for the culminating work of this course. Let's dive into our first major section, Understanding Research Practice Gaps. This section will help you recognize the scope of the problem and understand why this gap exists across virtually all professional fields. We'll examine evidence, explore different perspectives, and consider the various forms this gap takes. The research practice gap is the disconnect between what research evidence shows and what actually happens in practice. It's the space between discovery and implementation, between knowing and doing. On the left, we see the formal definition, this disconnect that prevents evidence from improving outcomes. But look at the right side, the problem's magnitude. It takes an average of 17 years for research findings to reach clinical practice. 17 years. Think about that. Research published when today's college freshmen were born is just now reaching routine practice. This isn't just a healthcare issue. This delay impacts innovation, efficiency, and outcomes across all professional fields: education, social work, business, public policy. Every field struggles with this challenge. Consider the implications. Patients not receiving optimal care, students missing out on proven teaching methods, organizations using outdated practices while better alternatives exist. This gap costs lives, money, and opportunities. Now, why does this gap exist? Let's examine three critical perspectives. Researchers often say, practitioners don't read our studies. They focus on publication, getting papers in high-impact journals, rather than application. The academic reward system reinforces this. Tenure and promotion depend on publications, not practice change. Practitioners counter with, research isn't relevant to our context. They face time and resource constraints. They're dealing with real patients, real students, real clients who don't fit neatly into research protocols. The controlled conditions of research don't match the messy realities of practice. Organizations add another layer. Implementation is too expensive. They lack infrastructure support. They worry about disrupting existing workflows, retraining staff, updating systems. Change is costly and risky. Each group has valid points. The gap isn't anyone's fault. It's a systemic problem requiring systemic solutions. Not all research use is the same. We distinguish between two primary types. Conceptual use changes how we think about problems. It influences understanding, shapes perspectives, informs our general approach. For example, research on adverse childhood experiences changed how we think about adult health problems, even if it didn't immediately change specific practices. Instrumental use means directly applying research to solve specific problems. It guides decisions, implements protocols, changes practices. This is what we typically think of as evidence-based practice. Both types matter. Sometimes research needs to change minds before it can change practices. Conceptual use often precedes instrumental use. We need to understand differently before we act differently. The key is recognizing which type of use we're aiming for and designing our dissemination strategies accordingly. Now let's move to our second major section, models for research translation. We'll explore 7 evidence-based frameworks that help bridge the research practice gap. Each offers unique insights and strategies. Understanding these models helps you choose the right approach for your context and goals. Now let's move to our second major section, models for research translation. We'll explore 7 evidence-based frameworks that help bridge the research practice gap. Each offers unique insights and strategies. Understanding these models helps you choose the right approach for your context and goals. REAIM provides a practical framework for evaluating public health impact. Each letter represents a critical dimension. R, E, A, C, H. Who participates? We need to know not just how many, but who we're reaching. Are we reaching those most in need? Effectiveness. Does it work? Not just in controlled trials, but in real-world conditions with real-world constraints. Adoption. Who delivers it? Which organizations, practitioners, or settings take up the intervention? Implementation. How consistent is delivery? Is the intervention delivered as intended, or does it vary significantly? Maintenance. Is it sustained? Both at individual and organizational levels. Many interventions work initially, but fade over time. The power of REAIM is its comprehensiveness. Too often we focus only on effectiveness, but in highly effective intervention that reaches few people, isn't adopted widely, is implemented poorly, or isn't maintained, has limited public health impact. Each dimension matters. A moderately effective intervention with broad reach and sustained implementation may have greater impact than a highly effective one with limited reach. Evidence-based practice integrates 3 core components, represented by these overlapping circles: best, research evidence; current, relevant, high-quality research findings. This is what we typically think of as evidence. Clinical expertise, professional judgment, experience, and skills. Practitioners aren't just conduits for research, they interpret and apply it. Patient values and preferences. Individual needs, preferences, and circumstances. What matters to the people we serve? Effective practice emerges at the intersection of all 3. Research evidence alone isn't enough. Clinical expertise without evidence risks perpetuating ineffective practices. Ignoring patient values leads to poor adherence and outcomes. This model reminds us that evidence-based practice isn't about rigid protocols. It's about integrating multiple sources of knowledge to make the best decisions for specific situations. The translational research continuum shows the journey from discovery to population impact. T0. Basic science is where discoveries happen. Understanding fundamental mechanisms. T1. Bench to bedside translates basic discoveries into human studies. Does it work in people? T2. Clinical practice develops guidelines and protocols. How should we use it? T3. Community dissemination spreads interventions beyond controlled settings. Does it work in the real world? T4. Population health achieves broad impact. Is it improving health at scale? Each transition represents a critical translation point requiring different strategies, stakeholders, and success metrics. Most research funding focuses on T0 and T1. We need more emphasis on T2 through T4, the stages that actually reach people. Implementation science provides systematic approaches to getting evidence into practice. Key questions guide this field. What works? For whom? Under what conditions? How do we scale successful interventions? What are core versus adaptable components? How do we sustain change? Core strategies include facilitation, active support for implementation, audit and feedback, using performance data to drive improvement. Champions, leveraging local leaders who advocate for change. Communities, creating peer learning networks. Implementation science recognizes that evidence alone doesn't change practice. We need active strategies addressing organizational, individual, and system-level barriers. Participatory research models flip traditional approaches. Instead of researchers studying communities, researchers work with communities as partners. Core principles include co-creation of research questions. Communities help decide what to study, shared decision-making throughout the process, community capacity building, research that strengthens communities, action-oriented outcomes, research that leads to change, and mutual benefit. Everyone gains from the partnership. The fundamental principle: nothing about us without us. Communities aren't subjects to be studied, but partners in knowledge creation. Rogers's diffusion of innovations. Theory explains how new ideas spread through populations. The bell curve shows adopter categories. Innovators, 2.5%, are risk takers who try new things first. Early adopters, 13.5%, are opinion leaders others watch. Early majority, 34%, adopt once benefits are proven. Late majority, 34%, adopt when it becomes standard practice. Laggards, 16%, resist change until absolutely necessary. Understanding these categories helps target dissemination strategies. Don't waste resources trying to convince laggards early. Focus on early adopters. They influence others. Design different messages for different groups. Innovators want cutting edge. Late majority wants proven, safe options. Let's move to our third section: stakeholder engagement approaches. This section explores how to identify, engage, and sustain partnerships with those who will ultimately use your research. Remember, research done with stakeholders is far more likely to be used by stakeholders. Effective stakeholder identification uses this influence interest matrix. Primary stakeholders directly affected by the research: end users, practitioners, patients. They have high interest, but may have varying influence. Secondary stakeholders indirectly affected: organizations, policymakers, funders. They often have high influence, but varying interest. The matrix helps prioritize engagement: high influence, high interest, manage closely; high influence, low interest, keep satisfied; low influence, high interest, keep informed; low influence, low interest, monitor. Don't assume you know who stakeholders are. Ask, who makes decisions? Who implements changes? Who is affected? Who funds initiatives? Who opposes change? Stakeholder engagement isn't a single event. It's continuous throughout the research process. Planning phase: priority setting, question formulation, resource allocation. Stakeholders help ensure you're studying what matters. Conducting phase: data collection support, recruitment assistance, context insights. Stakeholders provide access and understanding you couldn't gain alone. Dissemination phase: interpretation, implementation, knowledge translation. Stakeholders help make sense of findings and put them into practice. Early and continuous engagement leads to more relevant and implementable research. It's not about token involvement, it's about genuine partnership. Each phase offers opportunities for meaningful contribution. Effective stakeholder identification uses this influence interest matrix. Primary stakeholders directly affected by the research: end users, practitioners, patients. They have high interest, but may have varying influence. Secondary stakeholders indirectly affected: organizations, policymakers, funders. They often have high influence, but varying interest. The matrix helps prioritize engagement: high influence, high interest, manage closely; high influence, low interest, keep satisfied; low influence, high interest, keep informed; low influence, low interest, monitor. Don't assume you know who stakeholders are. Ask, who makes decisions? Who implements changes? Who is affected? Who funds initiatives? Who opposes change? Knowledge brokers bridge the gap between research and practice. They serve 4 critical roles. Translators make research accessible, converting academic language into practical terms. Facilitators enable connections between researchers and practitioners. Capacity builders develop skills in both communities, helping researchers understand practice and practitioners understand research. Synthesizers integrate knowledge from multiple sources into coherent, actionable insights. Effective knowledge brokers speak both languages, research and practice. They understand both worlds' constraints, priorities, and success metrics. One size doesn't fit all in dissemination. Different audiences need different formats and channels. Researchers want journal articles in academic journals. Practitioners need practice briefs through professional networks. Policymakers require policy briefs delivered through direct meetings. The public responds to infographics on social media. Key principles: know your audience, understand their information, needs, and preferences. Use multiple channels. Don't rely on a single dissemination method. Plain language. Avoid jargon for non-academic audiences. Action-oriented. Focus on what to do, not just what we found. Refer to table. This matrix matches audiences with appropriate formats and channels. Notice how each combination reflects that audience's needs and constraints. Sustained partnerships require strong foundations and continuous maintenance. Foundation elements: trust built through transparency and reliability. Mutual benefit where all partners gain value. Clear roles with defined responsibilities. Maintenance strategies include regular communication, not just when you need something. Shared decision-making that gives partners real influence. Celebrating successes together. Addressing conflicts openly before they fester. Adapting to changing needs over time. Planning for sustainability beyond current funding. Partnerships aren't just useful for current projects. They create infrastructure for future collaboration, making each subsequent project easier and more impactful. We must distinguish between statistical and practical significance. Statistical significance, p less than 0.05, tells us an effect probably isn't due to chance. But it says nothing about whether the effect matters in practice. With large samples, tiny effects become statistically significant. Practical significance considers effect size and context. It asks, does this make a meaningful difference in real-world settings? Questions to assess practical significance. Is the effect large enough to matter to stakeholders? What resources are required to achieve this effect? Is the change sustainable given real-world constraints? Will users notice and value the difference? What's the cost-benefit ratio? A statistically significant 2% improvement might not justify expensive implementation. A non-significant 10% improvement might warrant further investigation. Always report both statistical and practical significance. Context determines what works, for whom, and under what conditions. 6 key contextual dimensions. Organizational, culture, resources, readiness for change. Individual, skills, attitudes, workload of implementers, environmental. Policy environment, funding, competition, social, networks, norms, community values, technical, infrastructure, tools, information systems, temporal, timing, urgency, competing priorities. These factors interact in complex ways. An intervention successful in one context may fail in another. That's why we can't just copy best practices. We must adapt them to local contexts. Always assess and report contextual factors. They are not confounding variables to control. They are essential information for implementation. The adaptation fidelity balance is crucial for successful implementation. Refer to balance scale diagram. Too much fidelity and interventions don't fit local contexts. Too much adaptation, and we lose what made them effective. The sweet spot distinguishes core components. Must maintain these. They're essential for effectiveness. These are your active ingredients. Adaptable elements can modify to fit local context and needs. These include delivery methods, scheduling, materials, language. Research should identify which components are core versus adaptable. This requires understanding not just what works, but why and how it works. Mechanism understanding enables appropriate adaptation. Plan for scale and sustainability from the beginning, not as an afterthought. Scalability considerations. Resource requirements at scale. Can this work with 10 times the participants? Training and support needs. How do we maintain quality as we grow? Quality maintenance strategies. What systems ensure fidelity at scale? Technology infrastructure. What platforms enable efficient scaling? Sustainability factors. Long-term funding models. How does this continue after grant funding? Organizational commitment. Is there buy-in beyond champions? Integration with existing systems. Does this complement or compete? Continuous improvement cycles. How do we keep improving? Brilliant interventions that can't scale or sustain have limited impact. Design with the end in mind. Let's synthesize our key takeaways from today's lesson. First, the research practice gap is real and costly, but it can be bridged. This isn't an inevitable problem. With deliberate effort and appropriate strategies, we can accelerate translation from 17 years to something much more reasonable. Second, multiple translation models exist. Choose based on your context and goals. We explored 7 models today. Each offers valuable strategies. Your job is selecting and combining approaches that fit your situation. Third, early and continuous stakeholder engagement is essential. Don't wait until you have findings to share. Involve stakeholders from day one. Research done with people is far more likely to be used by people. Fourth, research relevance requires attention to context and practical significance. Statistical significance isn't enough. We need research that matters in real-world settings with real-world constraints. These aren't just academic concepts. They are practical tools for ensuring your research makes a difference. As we close, I want you to reflect on 3 critical questions. First, what research practice gaps have you observed in your field? Think specific. What discoveries aren't reaching practice? What practices continue despite contrary evidence? Second, how might you design research to enhance its practical application? Based on today's models and strategies, what would you do differently? Third, which stakeholders would be most important to engage? Who are the key players in translating research in your field? Take a moment to jot down your thoughts. These questions aren't just exercises, they're the foundation for your future research approach. Remember, the goal isn't just to conduct rigorous research, it's to conduct rigorous research that makes a difference. The frameworks and strategies we've explored today give you tools to bridge the research practice gap in your own work. Thank you for joining me in Module 14, Lesson 1. In our next lesson, we'll explore evidence-based practice frameworks in greater detail. Until then, keep thinking about how to make your research matter.